Hi, I'm Yaakov Katz, and welcome to a new episode of the Jewish People Policy Institute's Inside Analysis on the state of affairs in Israel and the Jewish world. We're talking on Monday, just about 36 hours after I got to spend the night up watching as a drone, cruise missile, and ballistic missile attack was making its way toward Israel and then flying just over my head here in Jerusalem with the kids awake. Lots of fun, I could say, almost like reality TV in a strike against your country. But I brought on the show today a good friend, and really, I want to say one of the foremost experts on what has to do with this nexus, if we can call it that, of Israel, America, and Iran. Mark Dubowitz is the CEO of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, a nonprofit and basically a nonpartisan think tank that's really looking at how to keep America strong, but also how to keep the Israel and U.S. relationship strong, and particularly from a security perspective. So, Mark, it's really great to have you with us today. And I want to start from the top. You know, there was this strike against General Zahedi now at the beginning of the month. So we're already talking about 13, 14 days ago in Damascus. And the Iranians right away announced that they're going to retaliate and they're going to respond. Now, in the past, something that I found interesting is Israel is reported to have killed Farahzadeh, right? The Mohsen Farahzadeh, the nuclear godfather of Iran, with a AI remote control gun somewhere in Iranian territory. There have been explosions, mysterious ones in Natanz over the years, also believed to have been carried out by Israel. There was never really a response like this. Now, what do you think it is, or it was, maybe not about this guy, maybe about the period we're living in, maybe about October 7th, but what was it that brought the Iranians to do this massive assault on Israel? Because of this General Zahedi, who probably 99.9% of the world had never even heard of until he was killed in Damascus?
So, Yaakov, thanks so much for having me on. It's great to see you. So I think that the Iranians have been responding. They've been responding through proxies, and they certainly responded in a rather flagrant way on October 7th when they unleashed Hamas, who they had trained and financed and weaponized to slaughter 1,200 Israelis and take over 240 hostage. So I think what you've seen over the years is Iranian responses to the killing of their top scientists, their IRGC commanders, because again, the Islamic Republic has been at war with Israel for over 40 years, but the Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei has fought that war through his proxies. This was unusual. It's not even unusual, it's unique. It's the first time that the Iranians struck Israel directly from Iranian soil. And I think it has less to do with General Zahedi and the other 6 IRGC commanders who were killed in Damascus, even though Zahedi was a big fish, and one must recognize that. I mean, after Qasem Soleimani was probably the most seasoned battlefield commander that the Iranians had, responsible for the relationship with Hezbollah, for getting, tens of thousands of missiles, including precision-guided missions into Lebanon that are currently threatening Israel. There's some talk, I've seen some evidence that he was actually responsible for the planning and execution of October 7th. And he also, remember, Yaakov, from an American perspective, he was responsible for the planning of the operation in Jordan that killed 3 American soldiers and maimed others. So Zahedi was a big deal. It was a big fish. But you're right. I mean, the Israelis have taken out other significant IRGC assets without a direct Iranian response. So why is this different? It's different because I think that the Khamenei, the supreme leader, wanted to signal to Israel that he is not only triggering his ring of fire around Israel, all of these proxies, but now he is normalizing a direct attack on Israeli soil from Iran. And he wants to show Israel and the world his capabilities.
And so it's also about, to some extent, and we're going to get into the attack in a moment and break it down. But would you agree with me? My feeling has long been, and definitely since October 7th, when they, like you said, unleashed their proxies. And, I was thinking about this the other day. the world tends to look at Ukraine as the most threatened country because they're being attacked by Russia, which is this mammoth of a military and a country. But when you think about it, it's on one country that's attacking Ukraine, Russia. Israel has Hezbollah, has Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in the north, the Houthis from Yemen, and now we're attacked from Iran. That's 4 countries or 4 territories that are launching attacks against the.
Add Syria and Iraq into that as well. I mean, with the Shiite militias, obviously.
100%, right. So, I mean, we're looking at 5, 6 different fronts at once against the tiny little state of Israel. But since October 7th, and like you said, Mark, they've unleashed their proxies. They've been attacking. And yeah, we saw President Biden's speech of don't, and we saw the dispatch of all these, aircraft carriers, the Ford, the Eisenhower, et cetera. But really nothing happened to them. And therefore, was it that Khamenei also felt, maybe to some extent, I have immunity. No one can touch me. No one will ever attack me. Was that part of the calculation?
I think it was part of the calculation. But remember, this attack looked awfully like the attack that the Iranians launched against U.S. troops after the Trump administration, with a great intelligence assist by Israel, took out Qasem Soleimani, right? It has all the same hallmarks of it, which means that it was telegraphed in advance. We're going to respond. So there were sort of days of telegraphing. And then there were back channels. In the case of the Soleimani killing, the Iranians went through the Swiss to deliver a message to the Americans that they were going to hit the base and they were going to fire missiles, and it was coming. Here, they were back channeling through the Turks and through others, saying to the Americans, it's coming. It's going to come in the next 48 hours. And here's what it's going to look like. And so I think that telegraphing of the punch was very similar. And no one was surprised. The Israelis weren't surprised. The Americans were surprised. The Americans were coming out, right after and saying, within the next 48 hours, this is what the attack's going to look like. I mean, they had, quote, exquisite intelligence on what it would look like. It was essentially the Iranians telling the Americans through the Turks and others, here's how we're going to attack. So I don't think Khamenei was looking for the element of surprise. I don't think he was looking to do devastating damage to the Jewish state, though I think he was hoping some of those cruise missiles and ballistic missiles would go through and kill more Israelis than just a poor 7-year-old Bedouin girl who's currently in hospital with severe head injuries. But I think what he wanted to do was send a message. The ring of fire is not just my proxies, Israel. I am prepared to attack you directly from Iranian soil. And by the way, here are some of my impressive capabilities. I can basically target within 100 meters specific Israeli sites, including air bases and others, using my missiles and my drones. So I'm putting you on notice. I have these capabilities and I have the will.
There's been a lot of conversation here in Israel and discussion about the intelligence that preceded the Israeli strike against that building in Damascus in the targeting of Zahadi, and whether the intelligence officials in Amman, in the military intelligence, and likely also in the Mossad who were involved in these discussions, had said to the cabinet that the expected response or retaliation from the Iranians would not be beyond the norm. In other words, since October 7th, as we all know, there have been rules of engagement that have kind of been written. They're unwritten. They're written through the missiles that fire and are launched across the border. But, we know that Hezbollah fires within a few kilometers of the border. Israel attacks back, and in occasional extraordinary circumstances, they go deeper and we go deeper. But really, everything is kind of set. And it seems that that's what the ministers were told before approving this attack. And maybe it was a misread of intelligence, because look at what happened. The attack itself, and we'll get there in a moment, did not really do anything. As we said, we pray for the Bedouin 7-year-old girl, but it did engulf Israel in a bit of a sense of hysteria. And I wonder if it was worth it.
Well, first, I would say that, Amman has so far not a great track record of reading the intentions of Israel's enemies. And we can talk about that and whether a change in leadership is required there. And I would say, not to put too much on Amman, because the United States has been as dismal in trying to assess the intentions of Ali Khamenei. I mean, one has to remember, this is the most hardened, deadly, and brilliant strategist in the Middle East. He's outlasted dozens of Israeli prime ministers and American presidents. And he's very, very smart about how he uses power, about how he signals intentions. And by the way, I mean, it's worth noting that, he's created a weapon of mass destruction on Israel. All of us now are obsessed with North, the Houthis that have shut down the Red Sea, the Shiite militias that keep firing rockets at Israel and in the United States. And yet he's, with this weapon of mass distraction, he's been able to advance his weapon of mass destruction. So I think, again, one has to understand this Iranian attack directly at Israel in the context of mass distraction, in a strategy where Khamenei, at the end of the day, wants to get everybody tied down with these quote emergencies, hysteria, panic, plus serious tactical decisions that have to be made by the Israelis while he's advancing his nuclear weapons program. And I think that continues, and I think this should be seen as part of that entire strategy.
So I do, if we already brought up the Amman story, let's stand that for one moment, right? I mean, this isn't, as you said, not the best track record, definitely since October 7th. Is it, according to your analysis, do you think it's a misunderstanding of the intentions of what's going on in the head of people like Khamenei, so not fully understanding where the leadership is? Because we know, I mean, Israel does have advanced capabilities on SIGINT and, gathering the signal intelligence and, satellite encrypt, whatever, reading the maps and things like that. But this is a different type of intelligence. It was like Sinwar, if we think about him in Gaza, put us to sleep to an extent by making us believe he wants more money and economic prosperity as opposed to war. And it seems that also it's a similar type of mistake about, we'll kill Zahadi, but Khamenei, nah, he doesn't want conflict. He won't attack us directly, but here he goes ahead and does it. So it's like, is there a common thread there?
Yeah, I think there is a common thread. I mean, I think, look, if you compare October 7th to what's happening now, I think there's a misunderstanding of the intentions of Israel's enemies, right? A over-reliance on technological wizardry to counter the enemy, right? A belief that at the end of the day, Sinwar, like Khamenei, like Sinwar, doesn't want to escalate and put into and hold at risk his regime, right? And so is pragmatic, not moderate, but pragmatic, and can be bought off with massive economic relief. In the case of Hamas, by Israel and Qatar. In the case of Iran, by American sanctions relief, right? And so this idea that these are, pragmatic, calculating men who, at the end of the day, are not willing to risk their regimes by engaging in vicious attacks against Israel. I think it's a failure to understand the enemy, and it's certainly mirror imaging. I think what we call in the United States mirror imaging is when you superimpose your values, your assessment, your priorities on your enemy. Assume your enemy has the same values and priorities as you do, and I think the Israelis and we the Americans have made that mistake over and over again in assessing the intentions, will, and capabilities of our enemies.
So let's talk about the attack itself and what Israel is meant to do now. I want to break it down into two pieces. On the one hand, I think you'll agree with me, Mark, that it was pretty remarkable, the regional cooperation that we saw, the Jordanian involvement. I saw there was some fake story, which I don't know if it's true, that the King Abdullah's daughter in Jordan was, I then saw somebody say it's not true, but she's now a fighter pilot or something, that she was involved in shooting down some of the drones. But whatever it was in Jordan, we know that the Jordanian Air Force was involved. We had General Kurilla, who was here, the head of CENTCOM in the days preceding, and actually was in Jordan when the attack took place, overseeing things. We had the American Air Force, the British Air Force. There were reports maybe of the French. There were some stories about the Saudis who were doing things. Of course, the Israeli Air Force was involved. A pretty remarkable display of what's possible here, maybe in the Middle East, on the one hand. On the other hand, there's the dilemma for Israel of what to do. And what people are trying to say to us right now, and particularly the Biden administration, but you're hearing it from all across the G7, is look at what we did. I mean, look at how everybody worked together. You don't want to throw that out the window just to feel like you retaliated and got revenge against the Iranians. This is your win. Now, my feeling, and this is a bad example, I wrote this yesterday, but is that I grew up in Chicago. You know, you're Canadian, but I grew up in Chicago, and Michael Jordan was my hero as a kid, and we'd go to Bulls games, right? And the Bulls, when they won all those championships, right, they didn't win just because of the defense. They also won occasionally because Michael Jordan knew how to put on quite a good act of offense. So break this all down for me if you can.
Look, I don't want to minimize the regional cooperation that occurred. I think it's remarkable, and I think it does, portend what the future could look like, which is if there are the Abraham Accords that are extended to the Saudis and other Arab and Muslim countries that come in, the kind of regional cooperation, the kind of military integration that is possible, integration of air defense. I think one should note that the reason the Americans were able to provide Israel with the kind of early warnings that they did is because those are probably Saudi or Emirati or Bahraini radars that are picking up the early launch of those drones and cruise missiles. That information is going in real time to CENTCOM. CENTCOM is then passing that information in real time to the Jordanians, to the Israelis, to U.S. forces further afield. So certainly impressive, and I think it's a good example of what is possible, and I think what will be possible as we move forward, we get beyond Gaza and we get into potentially Saudi-Israeli normalization. So all of that, well and good. Here's my concern. My concern is this is not a win for Israel, and for Joe Biden to call it a win, I think is an exaggeration, especially if he pairs this is a win with stand down, right? Because stand down is not going to impress Ali Khamenei, right? Israel, you know this, Yaakov, you live in a tough neighborhood, right? And unfortunately, you have to deal with the split screen of global reality. The split screen is on one hand, you have to message to the West that you are a democracy, that you are responsible in your use of power, that at the end of the day, you understand the value of diplomacy, that you understand the value of international cooperation. Important split screen to the West. The other split screen is to the Middle East. And there you strike fear in the hearts of your enemies, because your enemies see all of that as weakness. And what they see as strength is your ability to use force disproportionately and inflict massive damage on your enemies. And so you're constantly in this split screen. It's one of the problems you've had with Hamas and Gaza recently, because you've had to message to the West about the reasonableness of the IDF, the fact that it's going to limit civilian casualties. On the other hand, you have to message to the Middle East that you are going to inflict devastating damage on Hamas and its terror infrastructure. So I want to be careful in assessing this as any kind of win. It was a win for Israeli technological wizardry. There's no doubt about it. Your air defense systems were phenomenal. Over 95% of the drones and missiles that were neutralized. It was a win for regional cooperation. I think it's an opportunity to leverage that to continue to isolate Iran. But if you're going to stand down, certainly if you're going to stand down for good and not inflict punishing retribution on Ali Khamenei, I think it's going to do serious damage to Israeli deterrence.
And by the way, that's something that I'm very concerned about, because I look at it as, are we in the post-October 7th Israel, or are we in the October 6th Israel? The October 6th Israel believed in containment as a policy. We believed that missile defense can give us a sense, can create security for us, and can provide us with the ability to defend ourselves. And we don't have to cross the line and go into Gaza or go into Lebanon and deal with these threats at their root and at their foundation. The post-October 7th Israel realizes that containment is not a policy and it does not work. And while Iron Dome, and in one of my books, I have a whole chapter on how incredible Iron Dome is, but Iron Dome is not a strategy. It's like you said, it's a great success. It's amazing wizardry. It provides us with a level of protection, but it's not the victory. It's not the win, and it's not the solution. And we need to create a deterrence, because if the Iranians don't see a response, what lesson do they learn? Right? I mean, so the question really is then, Mark, from in your opinion, Israel's options, I'm guessing, are quite wide, right? There are those more militant people who are saying we should go after the nuclear complex infrastructure, right? All the industry. We should take off Natanz, Iraq, Bushehr, Isfahan, Qom, and more. And there are others who are saying, no, we should just maybe launch a cyber attack in a couple of weeks that no one will really know it's us, but we'll be able to wink and smile and pretend it was us, and that will bolster the deterrence. So there's a wide range. Where do you think Israel should fall on this?
Well, first, I want to say a few words about deterrence, right? I think the Israeli strategy, which has been encouraged by the Americans for years, is deterrence by denial, right? The idea is that you as an enemy threatens us, you fire missiles and drones at us, and we'll shoot them out of the skies, and we'll deny you the opportunity to harm our civilians. That's deterrence by denial. In contrast, deterrence by punishment is you threaten us, and we will punish you severely and disproportionately. And I think Israel has been in a deterrence by denial
That's a good distinction
mindset, right? And that certainly fell apart. I mean, totally collapsed on October 7th, right, with respect to Hamas. And the Americans have been in with respect to Iran in a deterrence by denial mindset for many years, and arguably have done very little to even deny the Iranians their ambit and their ambitions in the Middle East, and have done nothing to punish the Iranians. If anything, Joe Biden has provided incentives, concessions to the Iranians to try and deter them. I think I call that, deterrence by appeasement, which is essentially give the Iranians everything they want in the hope that that will de-escalate things. So Israel has to shift to a deterrence by punishment strategy. Now, the question is, what is the target set? And as you've said, the target set could be anything from a small-scale cyber attack, maybe that directed at Iran's drone and missile facilities, so go after the production and storage of those drones and missiles, as sort of a direct attack against exactly the weapons that were directed against you, all the way, as you said, to going after Iran's nuclear weapons program. Now, I would add, I think I'm one of those who believes that at some time soon, Israel has to go after Iran's nuclear weapons program. And the question is, what element of the program? Is it the entire expanse of the program? We can talk about the details, but I do think the strategic threat to Israel today is the nuclear weapons program. And if Israel is going to bide its time, if Israel is going to serve that dish cold, revenge is a dish best served cold, Israel needs to focus on the strategic threats, not the tactical threats. So taking out a few drones and missiles or killing a few more IRGC commanders will be, tactical victories, depending on how extensive they are. But the real strategic threat is Iran's nuclear weapons program, and that is galloping ahead. And Israel's running out of time to address that. If Iran becomes a nuclear weapons power, even if they never use those nuclear weapons, it is an entirely different ballgame with respect to Israeli deterrence and the freedom of operation of the IDF to respond to those threats.
Which is why I looked at all these 330 or so drones, missiles, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles and said, we need to look as if each one landed here, killed people, damaged infrastructure, because looking at this, like you said, as a win, this is not a win, but that use of the term win does say something about where the president is and where this administration is. And I want to ask you, the Iranian proxies, they attack America, I don't know, what is it now? 200 times. You have people at FDD who are counting each incident, right? They've attacked already, probably 200 plus. They've killed American soldiers in Jordan. We have now a massive attack against America's closest ally in the region. And everything we hear from the US is, don't do anything, sit tight. We're gonna take this to the Security Council. We're gonna convene the G7 on Zoom, and we're gonna all talk and say, we stand by Israel's right to act in self-defense. But Mark, like I know, that they'll stand by us as we act in self-defense. The moment we do something to actually defend ourselves by taking the offense, suddenly we're gonna lose all that support. What is Joe Biden? What's his national security team thinking? Is it just get me to November, let me win that election, I'll deal with it then? Or is this really a belief that you can buy off and appease the Iranians? Because it hasn't been working.
Yeah. So, Yaakov, I think it's very important with the comment that you made about we need to treat that as if every one of those missiles and drones got through. I think we need to treat it as if every one of those missiles and drones not only got through, but had unconventional warheads, nuclear warheads, and chemical weapons attached to those drones and missiles. I mean, I think that's how Israel has to treat it. It's that serious. And I think Israel as long as Israel's on defense, and will abandon Israel when Israel is on offense, right? There seems to be a lot of world sympathy when Jews are dying on their knees, but very little world sympathy when Jews are fighting on their feet. So what is the Biden administration thinking? It's not thinking. It's trying to get to the elections. It's trying to essentially ensure that there's no regional escalation and no regional war. And for this national security team, they don't believe in deterrence by punishment. One has to understand that. They believe fundamentally that if America or Israel uses power, it's going to lead to Iranian escalation. That the only way to de-escalate with the Iranians is to offer them concessions and to back down. That is an absolute article of faith from this national security team. Remember, it's the same national security team from the Obama administration. Yeah. So you're seeing a lot of continuity from the Obama administration's approach to Iran to the current Biden administration's approach. They've never believed in escalation. They had to be kicked, dragging, and screaming by Congress back under Obama to impose punishing sanctions on Iran, and then turned around afterwards and said, gee, those sanctions actually may have worked in getting the Iranians to the negotiating table, but they were absolutely opposed to pressure. And in response to over 200 attacks against Americans since October 7th, and dozens of attacks even prior to that, their response was to go after Iranian proxies, but they were not prepared and they were scared about going after Iran directly.
What would change? How could that potentially change for the Americans, or will it never change? In other words, Iran could launch a direct assault and America and the Biden administration would still hold by the same policy?
Look, again, one could be surprised. Maybe actually a line that Iran could cross, but I'm deeply concerned that nothing would change. That it's an article of faith. When you negotiate with them, when you discuss this with them, it's like discussing the existence of God with your atheist friend. I mean, you bring all the evidence of God existing, and they bring all the evidence of God not existing, and you agree after 3 hours and a number of drinks. You're never going to persuade the other party about whether God exists or not. That is exactly what having a discussion with the national security team of Joe Biden is like. I've had those discussions. I haven't convinced them. They haven't convinced me about the use of American power and about what the Iranian escalatory ladder would look like. And unfortunately, what you're hearing from Joe Biden today to the Israelis is, do not retaliate. Iran will escalate. And yeah, let's convene the G7. Let's convene the Security Council. Let's build a regional coalition. Israel, what do you want? We're willing to give you almost everything, not to retaliate. But that's fine, Yaakov. You know what? Israel should use that opportunity for a couple of months to get everything it needs that is actually durable and permanent, concessions that are going to survive an Israeli invasion of Rafah to take out the remaining Hamas battalions, because as soon as that happens, the so-called shit's going to hit the fan, and the Biden administration is going to be putting immense pressure, including revoking any concessions they might have agreed to in the intervening months. And so, yes, Israel could get whatever it needs, as long as it's permanent, as long as it's durable. We can talk about what those concessions are. But at some point, Israel is going to have to find the time and the place and the right strike package to send a message to Ali Khamenei that, yes, Israel lives in a bad neighborhood, and deterrence by punishment is the governing philosophy of the IDF.
So I want to let you go, Mark, but one last question. I was thinking about that phone call that President Biden had with Prime Minister Netanyahu after just minutes after this attack, or as it was ongoing Sunday morning. And I was reminded of a story of a phone call that I told in one of my books about the Syrian reactor that George Bush made then to Prime Minister Olmert, where he said to him, listen, we've decided not to attack Syria's nuclear reactor. This is back in 2007. We're sending Condoleezza Rice to Israel. You're going to unveil and reveal the existence of this reactor. We're going to then go to the Security Council, kind of the then version of the G7 and the Security Council of today. We're using diplomacy. Israel, sit tight. We got your back. And Olmert says back to Bush, Mr. President, I carry the burden of the survival of the Jewish state on my shoulders. And if you're not going to act, I'm going to act. And, the rest of the story pretty much tells itself. Now, I recognize that was a different relationship between a prime minister and president. And I recognize that maybe the relationship today between Netanyahu and Biden is too tenuous, maybe because of Gaza, maybe because of just past, issues that the two men carry with one another. Could Israel, in your mind, because of how much we need from the Americans and how dependent we are from the Americans, could Netanyahu even give an answer like that to Joe Biden today?
Look, I don't have much confidence in the prime minister to make any decision, especially of that significance. I think the prime minister today's he's always been this way, but I think more so than anything, it's his decision-making style today is to defer and defer and defer, and especially under enormous American pressure. And listen, I'm sympathetic to that. It's very difficult for an Israeli prime minister to defy an American president, particularly when you're at war, particularly when you're so dependent on American resupply for the key weapon systems and ammunition that you need to defend yourselves. And yeah, I mean, over the past 6 months, obviously, Israel has been very isolated as it's done what is necessary to take on Hamas and destroy its terror infrastructure. So there is an opportunity, and there is an argument that, for the next few months, isolate the Iranians, put the focus on the Iranians, and put them in the penalty box, to use a hockey analogy, Yaakov, since I am from Canada. Put them in the penalty box, keep them in the penalty box, and build up your military inventories, right? Repair some of the relationships with the White House and some with Democratic members of Congress and with our European and other allies. And then again, revenge is a dish best served cold. There is an opportunity. I don't think it's now. I don't think it's in the next week. I don't think, Mossad needs to act against Iran's nuclear weapons program today. But there's something that's going on that is very important right before we end this podcast, and that is Iran is moving ahead with its weaponization activities, right? The 2007 U.S. National Intelligence Estimate, which still stands today as the consensus view of the U.S. intelligence community, is that Iran has not begun weaponization activities. Well, they have. It's preliminary, right? It's not at the core of the warhead, but it's preliminary weaponization activities. That's a sea change. Iran has broken ground on a new facility at Natanz. It's going 100 meters underground, buried under a mountain, encased in concrete, heavily fortified. That'll be finished in 2 years. Mossad may only have a year, maybe less, to actually do something creative to make that facility inaccessible. And not to mention, that Iran today is 7 days away from breaking out to 1 bomb's worth of weapons-grade uranium, 5 bombs in a week, and 13 in 5 months. I mean, the program it's a five-alarm emergency in Iran's nuclear weapons program. The Israeli political establishment is massively distracted by all of the things going on in your country. This is adding to that massive distraction. And the Israeli government is going to have to make some tough decisions on Iran's nuclear weapons program. It doesn't have to be today. It doesn't have to be next week. It doesn't even have to be next month. So it could be that conserve your time, build your relationships, increase your political capital, plan those operations. And when you strike Ali Khamenei, hit him so hard that he'll think twice about ever threatening the Jewish state again.
Get ready is basically the way to wrap that up in 2 words. But Mark Dubowitz, CEO of FDD, Foundation for Defense of Democracies, thank you so much for joining us today.